Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to speak about a very vital topic that's necessary and very foundational before we begin to look at a chart. We have to remember first that the natal chart reflects the consciousness of the soul. It is not causative of it, and thus, you can have the same natal chart as 30 other people. In fact, you do. There are many other people who have pretty much the same exact chart. All it means is they were born at the location and time and date that was compatible with yours, be in a different time zone, but a different latitude, whatever. There are other souls. If you were born in the hospital, there might have been another baby born at the same time as you. You might be a twin. There are numerous cases and even case studies where we look at people of the same chart, but in fact, they're living very different lives. And so this poses a question. Either one, astrology is bogus, because if astrology is about our life and what's supposed to happen and who we are, why is it that people have different lives but they have the same chart? Or we have to really think about astrology in a very different way. We have to take a step back and not look for prescriptive one-size-fits-all ways of thinking about astrology or life, about one another, but come back into a broader awareness and attunement to reality. And we come back to this understanding that astrology isn't causing our chart, which means if it's only reflecting our inner reality, it must mean that the archetypes of the chart can be understood on multiple levels. For example, when I say the word Sagittarius, I'm not meaning one thing. The archetype, the energetic of Sagittarius, is a specific domain of consciousness. But Sagittarius can express on so many different levels of awareness. Sagittarius can manifest by way of religion. Understand, because Sagittarius as an archetype is about how we understand reality, our cosmology, our comprehension of life. So we can do that through religion, through a book, through a mainstream religious understanding that gives us the answers, that allows us to filter and interpret our experiences through a particular cosmology. Or when I say Sagittarius, we can think about philosophy, not religion, but asking the questions about who are we, where did we come from, what is the meaning of life, what is free will, what is choice. And we can look at the great thinkers of the world from many ages and read their books and think critically and have dialogue, have debates, have conversations. Think very deeply for yourself about what life is. Does God exist? What's real? Who am I? And when I say Sagittarius, we can also be speaking about cultivating wisdom and context and awareness of life, a contextual awareness of our place within life by listening to it. Not necessarily reading philosophy books or being intellectual, but actually looking into one's own nature, sitting quietly, breathing, learning from the teachers of nature, learning from the plants, learning from the river. And we could have a chart with things happening in Sagittarius, things happening in all the signs, and we all have that. We all have all the signs. We have all the planets. The only thing that differentiates one chart from the next is how they're organized and arranged with one another. And we could have one chart with the same kind of emphasis. Let's say a lot of planets in Sagittarius, right? 2 people. One person has decided to walk the path of a preacher in a religious church, preaching to a congregation and ascribing to a more mainstream Christian ideology. And another person is a shaman, and they are experiencing more of a universal, non-ethnocentric expression of divinity. One isn't better than the other, just different. And we can say each soul is embodying a different apprehension of reality, a different level of understanding. Their own self-realization is manifesting in different ways. So there's a resonance between the two because they're working with the same archetypal energies, but at different octaves. And this is one of the things that is not on the chart. You can't look at a chart and immediately assume this is what a person's life is going to be like. This is their karma. This is their intended path for this lifetime. You can't know the nature of the consciousness of the soul because the chart reflects life. The chart reflects the soul's reality. But we have to start with the soul. We have to start with actually feeling and connecting with the imminent reality, bring this closer, of the soul itself. So if someone comes to me for a session and they say, I'm struggling with my own religious beliefs, and I kind of don't know if, my religion or my synagogue or my church or my teachers are the way for me. I don't know if they have all the answers, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid if I speak out, they will reject me or I'll be made fun of. So we can know just from that alone, just from that statement, that right now, that's what they're working with. And so my role would be to support and encourage them to go more fully into what is opening and blossoming for them. On the other hand, if someone is at a point on their own journey where they feel a calling from God to enter into ministry, and I should say I'm not judging that as necessarily a lower octave, because you can have very evolved souls who are doing ministry work and working within mainstream religion. So just to be clear about that. But in this example, let's say it's within a consensus reality, mainstream religion, and they're personally ascribing to mainstream religious beliefs, and they think that, following this path and helping other people get saved by believing in what they believe, that is a next step for them. It is not for me to say otherwise. They wouldn't most likely be coming to me for a session, but it's not for me to encourage them otherwise. It is for me always, no matter who I'm with, to be an example of living in my truth and to care and really listen to, authentically tune into what is the next step for them on their evolutionary journey. And it's true for all of us on this journey that no identity lasts forever. We pick it up, we put it on, we experience it. And at some point we have to let it go. But then we come to a new one. So the next step, it's going to be a limited step. It's going to be a subjective, very specific kind of identity structure. But it's very often very relevant to move into it. And then if someone else comes to me and says, I don't have any beliefs, I don't know what to believe in, no one seems to have the answer, it's all just what people are making up, but I'm looking for meaning. What would I do for that person? Right? I would really want to yield into a greater sensitivity and attunement to what's their soul really calling for. I would not want to put a belief system on them, because it's true. These are all just beliefs. And if I speak about what I understand, I don't want that to become a belief. The life that I live, the path that I live, is just what's authentic for me. It's my own understanding, what's true for me. But I have to support people to find their own way. So when we look at a chart, we have to appreciate and really, really understand that every soul is manifesting at a different level of consciousness coming into this life. And we have to know how to work with a chart in a way that respects where a person's at. And Jeff Green taught a really beautiful paradigm that he describes as the evolutionary stages of consciousness. And Dane Rudar also spoke about that a little bit. And Jeff Green really expanded on this and drew a lot from Eastern cosmology as well, and his own observations simply as to the nature of consciousness. And I'm not going to go in depth talking about it because there's a lot of material about that, and I write about it in my book. I've taught classes on it, and Jeff Green's taught a lot about it. It's on the EA website. But I do want to offer a little perspective on this. The basic idea is that we can understand that the evolution of consciousness can be seen as sort of a spiral process. We work through the same archetypes, but at different stages of consciousness, different levels of comprehension. And thus, our degree of self-realization will manifest in different ways. And what's most important to understand when it comes to the idea of karma, we're bound by our karma so long as it is operative. And karma exists on the inside. And so at every level of consciousness, we're going to be playing out a certain karmic reality that is relevant to that level of consciousness. And thus, we're limited by that. There's a certain playing field, certain rules of the game that really dictate where we have to go. What are the boundaries or the parameters within which we're working? For example, if I have an internal need for social acceptance and approval, then my inner orientation is going to manifest a lifetime where one way or another, I'm going to be living a life and creating an identity that's focalized around social acceptance. I'm going to get a job that is accepted by the mainstream society. I'm going to enter into relationships and marriage and family situations that are acceptable and fitting within the mainstream of society. I'm going to dress and eat and think a certain way. I'm going to make love a certain way. Everything about me is going to be conditioned by a very specific construct of what's acceptable, what's appropriate, what's allowed according to mainstream culture. If I start seeing commercials on television for something that is new to me, but it's now being advertised to the public, and I'm seeing more and more people accepting it, then I will interpret that as okay. But I'm not going to be the first one to do something new. So that's my internal reality, and that implies a whole karmic reality that I'm going to be playing out. And I'll be evolving from there. So I might enter into a relationship with someone that does something that makes me uncomfortable. They're acting in a way that is, they're eating with their hands, and that's, of course, not appropriate. So that will confront my existing identity structure, my possessive sense of self, which is fine. It's what we all do, but it has to go at some point. Whenever we basically begin seeing that our reality is threatening us, it's good news. It basically means that something is ready to give way. We make it harder. It takes more time if we are in resistance to it. But if we enter into the dance and we allow it to show us something about ourselves, then we can move through it more quickly. And as it happens to be, it tends to take a long time because that's the nature of identity, especially in the earlier stages of evolution when consciousness is more identified with time and space contingencies. I am identified according to my gender, my social status, how society sees me, what I believe according to what is acceptable. At that level of identification, it's harder to work through the challenges and such. Because at that level, there's a little more density, so to speak. So to unravel that is like kind of chiseling away at a really crystallized hard surface and softening it slowly and slowly, or the way water will soften a hard surface over time. And so that might take several lifetimes or repeated experiences of identity structure being sort of attacked from all sides. And that's like the intricacy of karma that we really have to respect and appreciate. We might have a lifetime where our partner eats with their hands and we dump them because it's too much for us. And then we're going to be born into a culture that eats with their hands, and we'll migrate to the West where they don't eat with their hands, and we'll experience the ramifications of being judged as inappropriate for eating with our hands. But in our culture, that's totally normal. But now we're in this new Western culture where that's primitive and wrong, and so that'll impact our consciousness. On a soul level, we are aware, a part of us knows our own judgment and where we've decided this is not acceptable. On the level of identity, we don't know this is going on. We don't know our past lives. We don't know the karmic past that we're taking with us. And so there are these imprints coming from all directions that are basically showing us, helping us to let go, helping us to release the strongholds, the strong possessive sense of self that has defined who we are for a very long time. There we go. This light is really bright. I'm experimenting with a good light on me, but then it's also like, if I'm close, I'm like in the sun. All right. So we can call that consensus reality. And obviously, if you look around the world, the majority of the world is in that state of consciousness. And that's just the nature of it. It is the majority. And consciousness is defined at that stage according to being accepted and fitting into and ultimately mastering the rules of the game. But it's understood at a certain point that the rules of the game, what is set up and determined to be appropriate and right, is just a very limited subjective condition that is not inclusive of everything. And so the individuation process, just like a teenager has to individuate, on the level of consciousness, every soul has to individuate at some point. In some life, there's a need to say, you know what? I need to throw off all that is limiting my own individuality. So there's a need to think for oneself and determine for oneself what is the way that I want to live. But in many ways, during the individuation process, consciousness is very much defined, increasingly so, by what I am not. And thus there's a need to affirm and strengthen one's sense of self. And the intelligence, the intellect develops because there's a growing freedom from the need to fit in to any existing construct. And so in the individuated stage, we have a soul that realizes, you know what? I can eat however I want to eat. It doesn't matter. I don't care if people judge me. It doesn't matter what culture I'm in. I'm going to eat however I want to eat. I don't have to use a fork. And so they'll become, and then they might have this experience of their family saying, well, you can't come over for dinner. If you're going to eat with your hands, you're not going to be allowed to come over for dinner. And that is a huge experience that can catalyze them to go further into, well, I have to claim and sort of protect my own identity. Or it might be this challenge or the struggle of like, well, I'll go to church, I'll eat with a fork, I'll marry in my religion, I won't tell them of my sexual identity, I'll hide certain things, right? But at a certain point, that has to give. And so consciousness might at some point become very polarized, and it's like, well, I'm going to do whatever I need to do at a certain point. And it's very, very individualistic. And consciousness becomes very aware as well at this point of the need to honor and protect and give care to people who are not necessarily represented by the mainstream. And so when a person comes to me and they're on that level of consciousness, it's important for me to appreciate that they might really be working with knowing and differentiating themselves from the mainstream. And it would be inappropriate for me to be speaking about these larger, more lofty spiritual truths or ideals of everything's perfect the way it is. That's a completely inaccessible concept that may not be relevant or useful for all people at all times. We have a spiritual stage of evolution. And in that stage, basically a soul comes to a point where there's one way or another, a shift has happened or is happening, where attention is moving towards, I seem to find that my happiness, my joy, my wholeness is dependent upon conditions. I'm either always running towards or running away from conditions for my peace, for my well-being. I also notice that there's always going to be suffering. There's always something happening in the world, and I can't seem to do enough on my own volition to help. Basically, a consciousness becomes aware of the limitations of its own control, of its own intellect, of its own ideas and agendas, and assertion that life has to be a certain way. And in this stage of consciousness, there's a growing appreciation, a growing curiosity for what is true. For where does true peace come from? How can I truly be in service to others? How can I truly bring meaning and value and peace to my life and to others? And so the soul begins to cultivate a relationship to surrender, to the spiritual path where there's an awareness that there's a truth to reality just beyond the mental control that I'm constantly asserting. And a soul on this path will realize, I don't need to defend my identity. What does it look like to love my family even if they don't want to accept me as I am? Even if they won't accept my sexual identity, the way that I eat, my choice for spiritual or religious practices. Where is my power? And so you might walk this path of, separating for a while, exploring spirituality, but eventually coming back into the world and realizing there's this whole path of surrender, of acceptance, of finding one's true power on the inside, regardless of outcome, regardless of circumstance. And that might mean the soul's kind of struggling with the confusing. Does that mean I enable negative behavior? Does that mean I stay in abusive situations? What does it mean to find my power within? A soul develops discernment. It might not mean you live with your family. It might not mean you visit your family. But what does it mean to love them? What does it mean to know yourself and to know your truth so strongly that they can't take your power away? And we ultimately find compassion and forgiveness and understanding for people and their own suffering. And the soul during these stages is inclined to go deeper and deeper and deeper into a path that really allows them to blossom in a deeper spiritual awareness. And this can be a very difficult process, especially if there's been hurt and violations, because this is not a thing about, jumping into some sort of ideal state of forgiveness. It's a real encompassing process of understanding the true nature of the self, who we really are, and understanding the deeper healing potential in everything, which might mean walking a process of experiencing emotions and processes and healing that we can't control. Learning that we can't control life is a big part of this. And each of these stages has many different dimensions. But I share this to really just reflect the basic awareness. If a person comes to me and they say, how can I be in service? How can I love? Or they're expressing confusion about, I want to love, I want to serve, but I'm confused about when do I support myself? How do I take care of myself? What is the right way to discern service in a way that I'm not martyring? If they come to me and they say, I don't care what I'm doing with my life. I don't care what it looks like. I just want to live in love as a love that I am. Things like that. That's like a clear indication that when I look at their chart, I have to look at it with respect to a level of consciousness that is orienting towards a very spiritual state of awareness. And there are many souls in this planet that are there, but most aren't. And so when we look at a chart, we have to understand that the level of consciousness is not on the chart. And this map, there are many different maps that exist that map consciousness. I'm not so into them, and I don't think they're useful beyond just a general intellectual understanding. Our hearts know. Our hearts can feel and sense when we're with someone where they're at. We can feel inside of ourselves what's relevant. How do we know what's relevant? Because we'll feel it. We know what it feels like to say something to someone, and we know that it's just not landing, it's not really relevant for them, versus saying something and we can feel it, that this is resonating on the level of truth. It's like a string being plucked and all the other strings pluck. Truth works that way. So when we begin studying astrology, and when we begin looking at our own charts, and even when we begin looking at transits, we have to understand everything is contextual. If you're going through a Pluto transit, or if you see someone's going through a Pluto transit, you can't say, oh, this is going to be hard. It might be. It might be challenging, but it might be really empowering. There's a certain point where things are hard. Things can get really hard. It seems like that's a part of life. And I find that the more one grows spiritually, challenges don't go away. But the capacity and the internal strength to meet them with grace, with humility, with willingness, with self-responsibility, that increases. So we can go through difficult times and have a seemingly difficult chart with like lots of squares and really challenging things happening with the nodes, lots of aspects to Pluto, Neptune all over the place. And yeah, it might not be an easy life. There might be challenges. But we can also find it that chart reflects a soul that is very strong. that is at a point where they have an immense ability and immense capacity to do a lot of work, and that they're going to embrace this with strength and grow a lot. And at any level of consciousness, you could have a chart that's really difficult. And anyone who's manifesting a lifetime with that, it means that's what they're ready to do. It means that they're a strong soul. And we shouldn't judge a person that seems to be holding on and victimized and suffering and angry and aggressive and revengeful. They might be playing that out. It might look really ugly, but, sometimes, when we're, healing, we break out. Fever is actually when the body's releasing whatever's inside. So sometimes things get really ugly, but it actually means we're healing. We have to look with a heart of compassion. We have to look with so much care and gentleness and curiosity. And that really means in our own relationship to ourselves, to really practice that within our own life and not judge ourselves as wrong or off or messing up. So that when we're with someone else, whether we're an astrologer or not, we don't judge chaos and messiness as something horribly wrong, because sometimes that just means there's a process being released, and we don't always make it out gracefully, but we learn how to be graceful. That unfolds in time. But sometimes for many souls, especially that are not accustomed to certain levels of intensity, or even if they are, life can turn the intensity dial up if that's what's in store for us with our evolution. And so, in summary, we have to look off the chart to know how to appropriately gauge and understand how to interpret the chart. And we can't just look at the surface. We can't just say, oh yeah, well, you grew up in a church, in a mainstream society, or you grew up with spiritual parents, therefore you're this. We have to feel into them. A lot of souls are in a very consensus-seeming reality, or grew up in it, but they're actually on a very spiritual level. And for whatever reasons, whatever karmic reasons, whatever serves their own evolutionary growth and others, they might find themselves manifesting a life within a more consensus reality. We have to feel them. We have to feel with ourselves. And when I feel someone, I actually don't feel like they're different or at a different stage of evolution. That construct doesn't manifest for me, because that's just putting people in boxes and creating separation. What I will feel is this compassionate and sensitive and caring attunement to where they're at. And we do that with children, right? We're not judging them or labeling them as lower than us, but we're just appreciating where they're at right now. So we want to nurture a person's development according to where they're at, and to be really just listen and open and genuine. Whenever we give to someone, and that giving is relevant, it's a real giving. It's really what they needed. We feel clear and empty because we knew that we gave what we had to a space that was ready to receive it. And they feel met and loved and replenished because of it. That's how we want our interactions to be with astrology and in general.